What we're going to do here today is CMHC will give a brief update and high-level things that we've been up to over the last year. Then Siva will come up here from ISK to do a quick update for him, and then the balance of our time will be spent speaking with the panelists. So if you could kindly hold your questions to the end, and as we're speaking, maybe if you guys could think of questions that you would like to ask the panelists, you can do so at that time. Like I said, my name is Trim Kenyef. I've been with CMHC for over 15 years now, and in this role working with Indigenous communities for a little over 10 years now. Today, like I said, we're going to provide you a high-level overview of our structure, our goals, and two of our initiatives under the National Housing Strategy. Let me see if technology works. Haha, it did. Okay, so many of you may have heard, CMHC's new aspiration is that by 2030, everyone in Canada will have a home they can afford and that meets their needs. CMHC does recognize that this is an audacious goal in terms of finding housing solutions for 1.4 million households in core housing need. We will achieve this by delivering programs under our National Housing Strategy and offering affordable housing solutions and also doing housing research as well. This 10-year, $55 billion National Housing Strategy gives momentum to this audacious goal that CMHC has put in place, and we are proud to be doing this, and hopefully we will exceed our targets by the time we reach 2030. All right. So as Brad mentioned this morning in his opening remarks, CMHC has reorganized a little bit to help put our clients' needs first. And we are building a one CMHC approach, and our focus is working more with our clients and our communities. We have altered our course, moving away from applying stringent program guidelines and parameters to finding ways to say yes to our partners and innovative solutions. By putting you and other partners at the center of our thinking, we believe we can ensure that each dollar we invest goes further and moves us closer to our 2030 goal. We have made some changes to our business model, and we have a new team with new priorities and partners. We've expanded from First Nations communities to working with First Nations both in and off reserve and northern clients as well. We've renewed focus on partnerships, financial solutions, and business optimization, and our regional expertise is to help partners navigate all of CMHC's products and services. So this chart presents, this slide rather, presents the housing continuum. At CMHC, we are driven by our belief that everyone in Canada should have a roof over their head and be part of a world-class housing system, and this will provide the cornerstone of a thriving and inclusive society. We work with community organizations, the private sector, nonprofit agencies, and all levels of government to contribute to the stability of the financial system, facilitate access for Canadians in housing need, and offer objective housing research and advice to governments, individuals, and housing industry. Through our lending initiatives, we help Canadians in need gain access to suitable housing they can afford, and through our insurance, we provide mortgage insurance and client service to protect borrowers, lenders, and diversity in housing options. All right, we are proud of our role in bringing to life Canada's first ever National Housing Strategy. This is a 10-year, $55 billion plan that will fuel our economy, strengthen the middle class, and give more Canadians across the country a place to call home. Canada has one of the best housing systems in the world, but approximately 1.7 million families still do not have a home that meets their basic needs. Through the National Housing Strategy, the federal government is re-engaging in affordable housing and bringing together the public, private, and nonprofit sectors to ensure more Canadians have a place to call home. The goal of this historic strategy is to make sure Canadians across the country can access housing that meets their needs and that they can afford. The strategy signals a meaningful re-engagement by the federal government in housing. Now, my colleague Brad Anderson will guide you through two of the programs that we talked about under the National Housing Strategy, which will be the seed funding and the co-investment fund. Mr. Anderson?
Which one do you have?
This arrow, just
okay.
Go for it. Yeah.
Good afternoon, everybody. So, continuing on with Trim's presentation, and this is my part here, seed funding. And we'll just pop it over here. Okay, the first initiative that I'd like to introduce is seed funding. Seed funding can provide non-repayable contributions and or interest-free loans to assist with planning costs of building a new affordable housing project. It can also provide contributions to help preserve existing community housing projects so that they can remain viable and sustainable. CMHC will accept and review applications on a continuous basis. All applications for funding are assessed based on program fit, outcomes, and on the achievement of National Housing Strategy outcomes, including housing for those in greatest need, vulnerable Canadians, partnerships and collaborations, social sustainability, economic sustainability, and environmental sustainability. During the assessment, CMHC will determine the amount of funding your project is eligible to receive. Seed funding offers two streams. The first one is a new construction stream, which supports costs for completing pre-development activities related to the construction of new affordable housing supply. Maximum contribution, cooperatives, nonprofits, Indigenous groups could be eligible to compete for a contribution of up to $150,000 over a 2-year period to complete and submit a payment request over a 2-year period. The maximum loan for an interest-free loan up to $350,000, and it's given a 3-year period to complete. The second stream is the preservation stream, which supports costs for completing preservation activities related to the sustainability of existing community housing projects. This applies to projects that were previously under a federal operating agreement, including federally administered social housing projects and those transferred under a social housing agreement whose federal operating agreements have ended. The maximum contribution for this second stream available to carry out eligible preservation activities is up to $50,000 per community housing project. The maximum amount could be increased to $75,000 where the housing provider can clearly demonstrate how they provide housing to a greater number of low-income households and supports the NHS outcomes. Seed eligible activities. Hopefully everybody can read that. In terms of property type and size under the SEED program, there are no restrictions on the type, building form, or future residence of the project. The project must have a minimum of 5 affordable units, beds. The primary use must be residential. This slide shows a list of eligible SEED activities for both new construction and preservation funding. Examples of new construction include needs assessment, site surveys, drawings and specs, etc. Eligible project types include Indigenous community housing, community and affordable housing, mixed-use market and affordable rentals, shelters, transitional housing and supportive housing, conversion of non-residential buildings to affordable multi-residentials, and renovation of existing affordable units at risk of being abandoned or demolished. In addition to preservation funding, eligible activities could be a building condition audit or assessment, an energy audit, or a capital replacement plan. All right. Our next program is called the National Housing Co-Investment Fund that we're going to cover. It's under the National Housing Strategy, as I mentioned before, and the national. Pardon?
I have a question. Could you go back one slide, please?
Okay.
The 75K,
The 75K, the preservation stream, what does that mean? Is that renovations?
Could be renos.
Could be renos?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's 75K per house? How many houses, like say if
So
there's
it's
seven?
maximum for the entire stream. The stream, yeah.
That's it, 75K?
Yeah, it's for it's for
Like
pre-development.
say I,
Yeah.
like I have vacant houses in my community.
Mm-hmm.
Like 4 or 5 of them.
The seed funding is for pre-project costs.
Planning.
Pre-project planning, like putting together audits on and assessments, say, for example, I mentioned. There were also a number of other items I mentioned on there under that.
So under the seed funding, it's not intended to make repairs to those homes. It's to help develop the plan and how you are going to go about renovating those homes, the plans that go into it, the architecture, if anything, that needs to be done, engineers that need to be going into those homes to do an evaluation of what's required to renovate that house. It's not for renovating that house, it's for that.
So do you have applications for that?
There is applications available online that you can access
Okay.
to be able to obtain that.
So interest-free loans up to 350K.
Yeah.
Same thing? You got to make a proposal?
You have to make a proposal for that, yeah. And
Okay.
when you go online to apply, it takes you through the requirements that you do need to submit the application. It does help guide you through that as well. And
Okay.
as you're applying for it, and if you have any questions, you can always reach out to one of the specialists on our team to come work with you and assist you in that process.
Okay,
We'll also have at our booth, we'll have an opportunity to show you where you can put access those applications. It's called a portal. So it's on our webpage, and we'll show you how to do that. We'll have a demonstration tomorrow running throughout today. So, okay. All right. Okay. Okay, so we're moving on here. National Housing Co-Investment Fund. Some big numbers up there, 13.17 billion. So the National Housing Strategy's priority is helping people in the greatest need, like women and children fleeing family violence, seniors, Indigenous peoples, people with disabilities, those dealing with mental health and addiction issues, veterans and young adults. That's why the strategy will invest 13.17 billion in a new National Housing Co-Investment Fund. The National Housing Co-Investment Fund provides capital forgivable loans and low-interest loans in support of the creation of new affordable housing or renewal or repair of existing affordable housing across Canada. It covers a broad range of housing needs, from shelters to affordable home ownership. A total of 8.65 billion is available in low-cost repayable loans over 10 years and 4.52 billion in capital contributions over 10 years. Next slide. There are two streams within the fund. Housing construction stream, again, for new construction. Housing repair and renewal stream for the preservation and renewal of existing community and affordable housing supply. Both streams cover a broad range of housing needs, from shelters to affordable home ownership again. The National Housing Co-Investment Fund will create 60,000 new units, repair 240,000 existing units, create or repair at least 4,000 shelter spaces for victims of family violence, create at least 7,000 new affordable units for seniors, create at least 2,400 new affordable units for people with developmental disabilities. Under this stream, this is the new construction stream still, funding options include a low-interest loan, a capital contribution, or a combination of both. So loan or capital contribution. A total of $5.19 billion is available in available low-cost repayable loans over 10 years, and $2.26 billion through capital contribution over 10 years. Low-interest loans will be available for up to 20 years to support viability and long-term affordability projects. Okay, funding, repair, and renewal. Under this stream, funding options include a low-interest loan, a capital contribution, or a combination of both again. A total of $5.19 billion in available low-cost repayable loans over 10 years and $2.26 billion through capital contributions over 10 years. Low-interest loans will be available up to 20 years to support viability and long-term affordability of projects. And here we have National Housing Co-Investment Mandatory Minimum Requirements. So this co-investment fund, the overall proponents must demonstrate their financial and operational ability to carry the project and to provide evidence of financial viability of the proposed project itself, as well as the capacity to deal with developmental risks such as cost overruns and delays in construction and repairs and renovations. Affordability. Rents for at least 30% of the units must be less than 80% of the median market rent maintained for a minimum of 20 years. Energy efficiency. For new construction, projects must demonstrate that they will achieve a minimum of 25% decrease in energy consumption and greenhouse gas emissions over the most recent national building and energy codes. Repair and renewal. Projects must demonstrate that they will achieve a 25% reduction in energy use and greenhouse gas emissions relative to past performance. Accessibility. That's it, eh? Okay. I think that's it, eh?
I think so.
Yeah, okay. I'm going to find. So most of these information pamphlets will be at our booth. So that's the end of our presentation on those two major programs and that we're offering. There are others. You'll find those under this solutions comparison table that will be available at our booth. And we have some other information here on leaseholding lending on First Nation lands. But I think that's about it. Oh, here, okay. I'm mixing up my pages. So enhancement to leasehold lending on First Nation lands. Equity to support greater access to insured financing on First Nation land, we are removing the requirements for First Nation borrowers to provide a minimum of 10% equity from traditional sources. Leasehold loans without an MLG will now be subject to CMHC standard policies for equity. First Nation borrowers may satisfy minimum equity requirements from an acceptable down payment source outlined in the handbook for CMHC approved lenders. To facilitate home ownership without the requirement of an MLG, we are introducing an additional option for First Nation members. Mortgage loan insurance for leasehold loans secured by an A-to-A leasing for First Nation borrowers with a land allotment. What is an A-to-A lease? A number of First Nations operating under the First Nations Land Management Act or self-government agreements have adopted provisions in their land code or constitution that permit members holding individual interests in reserve lands to lease their land allotment to themselves, an A-to-A leasing, thereby creating a mortgageable interest that can be used as security. In addition to the policy requirements for leasehold lending, specific underwriting policy parameters apply when the loan is secured by an A-to-A leasing, including maximum 2-unit property. Must be intended for homeowner occupancy or a relative of the owner borrower on a rent-free basis. Leasehold arrangements must be acceptable to CMHC. The lender must inquire as to whether the First Nation has the necessary provisions in its land code or constitution to support A-to-A leasing, a legal framework for mortgaging by members, and a form of lease that has been reviewed by CMHC for purposes of mortgage loan insurance. For more information on A-to-A leasing, lenders are encouraged to contact the First Nations Management Resource Centre at info@labcr. Okay. Due to restrictions on the seizure of personal property under the Indian Act, shadow loan insurance is not permitted. Mortgage assumptions are not permitted. These loan insurance applications must be identified with the project tracker code identifier in Emily, which is part of our internal system. As always, CMHC's review of the lease and any other documents is solely for the purpose of loan insurance risk assessment. The lender remains responsible for the matters and must carry out its own review of the lease as a title document and to ensure compliance with CMHC requirements for leasehold lending. So that's a new one. Miigwech, thank you, from Trimanai. And as mentioned before, you'll have more of an opportunity to discuss any questions when we have our panel portion. Thank you very much, everybody. Pass the wand to you.
Yeah. Just waiting. All right, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Siva Pia. I'm the Senior Housing Officer with Indigenous Services Canada with the Ontario region. So my presentation is going to be about 15-20 minutes just to give an update on where we are with the housing. And for that, we've created recently, we created a placemat. It's still in draft form. I'm going to share the information from this. And if you have any questions, we'll be able to pick it up during the panel discussion. So I know it's kind of hard to read. I'm going to go from here all the way across, down to the left, to the right. So Chiefs Committee on Housing. We, in 2018 summer, we've helped the chiefs to come together and form a committee. It was called Chiefs Committee on Housing through Chiefs of Ontario. And they started working on how the Ontario region would form their strategy to address the housing needs in Ontario. So some of the bullet points there is what came out of that Chiefs Committee on Housing meeting in the summer of 2018. The directions were to focus on capacity building and skill development and development of community plans, and to develop partnerships among First Nation to support economic development and to share resources between communities, and ISC to be flexible with First Nations need. The committee met again in the summer of 2019. There were some additional bullet points that came out of that, which is leadership will explore process to extract data from AFN process. I know there's going to be a presentation on the First Nations housing strategy after our presentation. And one of the things being done or has been done is a data collection exercise by AFN from communities. So the chiefs in Ontario has directed the technicians to follow up with the AFN to get the data that is relevant to Ontario so that it can be used for planning purposes in Ontario. And there are some technical people assigned to work with the Chiefs Committee on Housing, and the department is providing the secretariat support to the committee. And then on to the next. Okay, I have a different printout than what it is on the screen. So this box here, it kind of gives you the high-level spending of what I don't know what happened. It was a different slide. Oh, it's okay. You can go with what you had. I'll switch my slides.
The power's gone.
Oh. Okay.
Oh, it's his fault. You'll be back on in a second. Just gotta kick back.
Okay. Okay, so let's start again. Starting with this slide here. Okay, so Ontario is home to the largest on-reserve population in Canada, representing almost a quarter of the country's Indigenous population. We have 133 First Nations in Ontario, of which 30 are remote communities and only accessible by air or ice road. So the need for ice roads creates additional challenges for some of the communities, and that's been taken into our programming for housing. So what has come out of, from some of the discussions we've had with the communities and with the Chiefs of Ontario, Chiefs Committee on Housing, here are some of the opportunities or challenges that we are focusing on for the coming year. It was clear that communities would need resources to develop lots, and many communities are running out of lots to build. So that's been identified one of the priorities that we should be focusing on. The Chiefs Committee on Housing is working on a proposal that's Ontario-based, and that is a work in progress. And there's also a need for housing for nurses, teachers, and police officers. This has been identified one of the challenges for communities. Fire prevention, especially in residential settings, has been flagged as one of the areas we should focus on, and also to work on labor market opportunities to create jobs and economic development for communities using housing as one of the drivers. Gender-based analysis is one of the considerations as well when we plan our programs and deliveries with the First Nations. And use of traditional and recycled materials. A number of communities have looked at what's available locally within their communities and capitalizing on those resources. Culturally appropriate designs. So as you know, we don't provide home plans or floor plans or designs anymore. It is the communities that develop those plans, and they are free to develop them that's appropriate for their cultures and design communities. And how to address the operation and maintenance requirements of residential properties. We don't provide additional resources for the operation and maintenance of homes in First Nations communities, and that's been identified as one of the challenges. The next box there is some of the innovative projects or pilot projects we've been working with a number of communities, starting with Pikangikum First Nation. There is a transitional home being built in partnership with the Ministry of Attorney General, Indigenous Services Canada, Ontario Provincial Police, Habitat for Humanity, and a number of other partners. Other pilot projects or innovative projects are tiny homes projects. So it was one of the first one in Ontario. It's being built in 6 nations. The community had decided that homes for single people in the community is a priority, so they are using their resources that we provided to build tiny homes. Muskrat Dam has been working on a rent-to-own project. They've also worked on an insulated panel construction homes. Pikangikum School worked on school portable conversions. We had built a new school for the community, and the old portables were assessed for engineering and the stability and the structural integrity, and it was determined that they are still in good conditions, at least for the next 15-20 years. So they converted those school portables into living spaces for Indigenous families. Muskikuak is working on their modular homes project. Big River is working on an insulated wall panel system homes. Wikimekong, I think some of you may have heard from the community earlier on in the presentation that they are focusing on ICF block foundation and block construction all the way to the roof. Wagoshik has done a cultural design of their seniors complex. It's now completed and occupied. And we are working with, this is new, with the tribal council from Wabununk Benjuang Association to see or to pilot an aggregated housing maintenance program, to hire a qualified maintenance person at the tribal council level and to work with a number of interns in each of the communities and to complete minor repairs as soon as possible or as soon as it's identified, and then to work with the community to secure a contractor for any major repairs. Chippewas of Newash has completed a pilot project in partnership with Habitat for Humanity and University of Waterloo. And Fort Severn, we're piloting a new foundation system there, a triadic foundation system. And Mohawks of the Bay of Quinte, actually they are doing the grand opening next week. They worked on a green energy project. It's a LEED certified designed and built homes. Next one over is the long-term care. This has been a prominent discussion in a number of communities. So some of the projects happening in that field is at Mohawks of the Bay of Quinte. They've received provincial approval to build a long-term care facilities. We funded a number of elder care facilities in Whitefish First Nation, Alderville First Nation, Wagoshik, and Moose Cree. So they've designed and built homes for elders in their community. Moose Cree First Nation is one of them. They've combined the assisted living, independent living, and palliative care in under one roof. That project is also near completion. And just as a note, we do have long-term care facilities in 3 of our First Nations, Akwesasne, Oneida, 6 Nations, actually 4 communities, and Wikimekong. They are already in operation. So moving over to the demand in Ontario, we don't have any accurate data on what the demand is, but going by the self-reported information by First Nation, there is a requirement or need to replace about 1,300 homes in our communities in Ontario. About 3,700 homes require major renovations, and of the total 26,000 homes recorded by the First Nations, 21,000 are determined to be adequate by the First Nation self-reporting. In terms of engagements and information sharing, as I mentioned earlier, we've been working with the Chiefs Committee on Housing. We're working with the Tribal Council Network. We are hosting the joint gathering with First Nation leaders and government partners. And we are here to share information, and there is also a long-term care engagements planned sometime in May 2020. One of the other programming areas that we deliver is ministerial loan guarantees. When a First Nation require a borrowed fund, we provide ministerial loan guarantee as to back loans. At this point, we have about 4,700 housing units under the ministerial loan guarantee program, under 715 agreements as of 18-19 fiscal year. Ontario Region has the highest mortgage value of under the Ministerial Loan Guarantee Program of $327 million. So moving on to the next slide. So some of it I already touched on, what we heard in terms of direction from the Chiefs Committee on Housing, which is to focus on capacity building, focus on partnerships among First Nations to support economic development, and ISC to be flexible with their programming. We've also heard that we need data to make decisions, and one of the sources where we would be drawing the data from is from the data collection initiative AFN has completed recently. The Chiefs Committee on Housing, when they met over the 2018 and 19 sessions, they had asked the technicians to come up with some governing models for Ontario, for an Ontario-based strategy to deliver housing. So there were 2 models presented at the last meeting, and again, there is going to be a presentation next by Barrett here, and I'll leave that to explain further. The Indigenous Homes Innovation Initiative, some of you may have heard, we did a call for proposal to pilot some projects under the Indigenous Homes Innovation. So we have the decisions from that call out. About 342 applications were received nationally. And from Ontario, about 83 applications were received. 5 projects from Ontario are approved out of the 24 nationally, and you can see the listing of projects approved there. So Thunder Bay Women Healing Lodge Society, Pikangikum First Nation, I can't say the other one, General Partnerships Incorporated, Tree to Home, North Bay Indigenous Friendship Center, Indigenous Clean Energy Social Enterprise. So these projects will be moving forward to the next stage to do a planning or feasibility study, and then followed by that will be a construction phase. The PCO deep dive, I think some of the communities have participated in a deep dive conducted by the Privy Council in the summer of last year. So we do have the report from that deep dive, and some of the recommendations are there. Primarily, the deep dive was to examine barriers and identify opportunities for improved housing outcomes on reserve. So the key recommendations from this review are clarify shared housing objectives, improve coordination within government, expand the support for governance capacity, increase predictability and flexibility of funding, promote best practices and innovation. So I think the panel will be discussing some of those recommendations. If you have any questions on those recommendations and how the government is responding to those recommendations. One of the other updates I wanted to touch on is the 10-year National First Nations Housing and Related Infrastructure Strategy. It was endorsed by the National Chiefs in 2018. It was founded upon the principles of self-determination, reconciliation, respect, cooperation, and partnership. The strategy is now now endorsed by the chiefs and is under the implementation plan. So the department is working with the AFN on an implementation plan, and it is AFN-led. We are providing the support and working with the AFN on the same table, and the goal of that implementation plan and the strategy is to transfer the care, control, and management of housing by First Nations. A First Nation-led data gathering exercise has been completed, and we are still waiting to hear the results from that data gathering. In Ontario, as of the last meeting we had with the Chiefs of Ontario, it was reported that 81% of the First Nation communities have responded to the survey with the data that was required, and that's what we are trying to extract from the AFN process so that it can be used for planning purposes in Ontario. We do expect a result to be available sometime this year, and the plan is to update that every 5 years. I know there was a special Chiefs Assembly, I believe last week. The update on that strategy and the data collection was to be reported on that at that meeting to the chiefs. So that's basically the end of my presentation. What we are going to move to is it's a panel discussion. We have 3 managers here on the table. I'm going to let the managers to introduce themselves, and then we'll move on to the next phase of the final discussion. So over to you guys for an introduction.
Good afternoon, everyone. Can everybody hear me okay? No? Okay. Just a little bit closer, or turn up the volume a little bit. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Terry Gibbons. I'm the Senior Manager for Indigenous and Northern Housing Solutions here in Ontario. I have a team of 8 specialists that work with me and 1 account representative. So it's really a pleasure to be here today. And are we starting just with intros, or are we
just intro? Yeah. So we would like each of the panelists to say their name and what their roles are within the organization, and then we'll move on to the next stage.
Okay. So I'll share with you a little bit. Okay, I'll let you introduce yourselves, and then I'll come back.
Okay, sounds good. I'll do the sound test too. Can everyone hear me in the back? Great. Okay. So hi everyone. First of all, thanks for having me here. It's great to be here. It's actually my first time at this conference, and it's been excellent so far. My name is Nelson Ferguson. I'm the manager of the On-Reserve Housing Program for Indigenous Services Canada in the National Capital Region. So our role, we work very closely with our regional offices, and we provide a bit of horizontal coordination between the various regional offices within Indigenous Services Canada. We also, of course, work closely with other departments such as CMHC and our partners such as FNHC too. So thanks once again for having us here.
And I'll try as well. Everyone can hear me? Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sean Mackey. I'm the Regional Manager for Environmental Public Health with Indigenous Services Canada, Ontario region. Basically, what we're interested in is public health on reserve, and apropos of this room, a lot of our EHOs will do inspections of housing and provide a public health report back to communities. So that's kind of our biggest role when it comes to housing, but we get involved with other aspects of health and environmental health and public health. And if I can ask the table down here of EHOs to put up your arms, please, just for a second. So they're going to have a table at the trade show tomorrow. Please go talk to these folks. These are the folks who work directly with their communities, with housing managers, band managers, even health and public health people in the community. So they're there to serve you. Please go and make the connections with them if you haven't already, because they are intended to be an excellent resource for your communities. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you very much. So next, we're going to ask each of the panelists to highlight a maximum of 3 topics of high importance that you are working with over the last year. Maybe we'll start with Terry.
Okay, so CMHC has been significantly preoccupied in the last year. As Trim mentioned, we do have a new audacious aspiration, and that is by 2030, everyone in Canada will have a home that they can afford and that meets their needs. So our president likes to shoot for the stars, and that's what we will be working toward over the next 10 years. We certainly cannot do this alone, that's for certain. We are going to be working very closely with our partners, the municipalities, the province, nonprofits, developers, to help us achieve this very audacious, big, hairy goal, as our president calls it. So what have we been busy doing this past year to set ourselves or align ourselves up so that we can achieve this? We have undergone complete restructuration, and our team is now called Indigenous and Northern Housing Solutions. Prior, we were First Nations Housing. So what does that mean? That now means that we are working with, we continue to work with First Nation communities on reserve. First Nations rural and urban communities, the Métis and the Inuit. So all Indigenous groups in Ontario we are working with. And we have had to also realign ourselves internally. So we have new departments that we work with. When we're working with programs off reserve, all of our applications come in through the portal. So we have been working very hard this past year. In fact, Ashita has been working tirelessly doing testing on our IT systems so that we can start accepting applications from communities on reserve through the portal. This we hope to launch in the spring of this year. So we have still to come some additional training and communications that will come out to you so that you will be well positioned to start submitting your applications online through our portal. So the other way we've aligned ourselves is because we are dealing with all applications that CMHC funds through the portal, we have had to create new departments. So we have a financial solutions department, we have contract department, and we have agreements department. So what that means is, and advancing. So what that means is, as the application comes into CMHC, it will go to first to financial solutions, then it will go to contracts and advancing, and that means that you're going to be working with different individuals through the process. So we are working very diligently towards making that process as smooth as possible. And you will be hearing more from us in terms of how that's going to impact you when you're submitting your applications online. And that's kind of what we've been focused on over the past year, getting ourselves ready, set up to achieve this audacious goal. Thank you.
Thank you, Terry. Over to Nelson.
Great. Thanks, Neva. So in terms of 3 areas that we're focusing on, number one, first of all, is the targeted investments. Now, over the past number of years, there's been significant funding that's been made into First Nations housing. We heard Chris talk a bit this morning about what that means in terms of Ontario. On a national scale, since Budget 2016, we had 2 years of funding for $416 million. And then afterwards, in budget 2017, there's another 3 years of funding at $200 million per year, so $600 million altogether. So it's been a significant amount of funding that's been directed towards housing constructions, renovations, lot servicing, but also capacity development and training too. So not just the physical builds, but also helping First Nations in developing the skills needed to manage housing on reserve, and also to try some pilot projects and some innovative approaches. And Siva was mentioning some of those approaches as well. Over the past 5 years, we've seen roughly, in collaboration with CMHC, nearly 19,000 housing units that either have been built or undergone major renovations. So there are 19,000 housing units that simply were not available 5 years ago. With that being said, one thing that we are aware of, and we've heard it time and time again today as well, is that while that's significant, there still remains a major gap, and there still remains quite a bit of work to be done. Just in the previous presentation on CMHC, we're seeing 100,000 homes still needed. So we recognize that nearly 19,000 homes that were built or renovated, it's not insignificant, but the work there has only just begun. So there remains much more to be done. So that's one priority, and I'll whiz through the other two so that I have time for Sean here. The other is that you may have noticed that we have changed our name several times over the past few years, and that we're now known as Indigenous Services Canada. That does come with a substantial change. Several months ago, the Indigenous Services Act was passed, and this is unique in that within the legislation for our new department, ISC, it actually mandates us to work with First Nations partners to transfer full care and control of service delivery to First Nations. So that what this means is that we're working very closely with First Nations to transfer all services that are currently being delivered by the department to First Nations or the organizations that they choose to work with. So on our side, we're working very closely to transfer full care and control of housing and infrastructure and the decisions that go hand in hand with that. And Siva made mention of some of those potential directions that can take in Ontario. It's still very early days, so this is we're doing something that hasn't been done before. So we're figuring out what this actually looks like in partnership with First Nations. So it's still early days as we chart the course forward on that. The third thing, Siva mentioned the deep dive. So this was an exercise. It was a exercise taken across the federal departments last year. To take a very sustained look at the way we deliver First Nations housing, internal to government, and looking at some of the challenges there. The report was released in the late spring, early summer, and frankly, the report itself didn't come as a surprise to anyone that has experience in housing in terms of the challenges that were identified. But it did provide a synthesis and a really good snapshot of what the internal challenges to the housing program are, internal within government. And so just some of the recommendations are up on the screen, but what we saw coming out of that were four main obstacles. The first was horizontal coordination within government. As you can see, there's multiple departments, multiple branches that are involved in the housing space. And to be frank, we don't always work as effectively and efficiently together as we can. So we're looking at ways that how can we make connections between the various departments so we're delivering services better and we're basically doing our jobs more effectively. So that was the first challenge that was identified. The other was in terms of data too. We've talked a bit about the importance of assessments and the importance of data gathering. There is quite a bit of information that's gathered by the federal government. Are we using it as effectively as possible, and are we making the best investment choices? So that's part, how can we use our data more effectively? The third one was in terms of supporting housing management and housing managers. So there's a recognition that housing managers have one of the hardest jobs out there. And I've been talking to people today too, and just recognizing the challenges that are in that field. And what can our role be in better supporting the housing management as well? And then the final challenge, I'm testing myself now, so we have horizontal coordination, data. You know what, the final one is actually the most important one. It's about the consistency, the flexibility, and the predictability of funding. So I mentioned that we had 5 years of funding, so it was 2 years and then 3 years. And government funding does tend to go in fits and starts, where you'll have a bulk of 3 years of funding will come in, but you don't necessarily know what will happen afterwards. It's been recognized that makes it very hard to do long-term planning. We've been talking this morning in various forums too, is that communities need to have a strategy going forward, and you need to have these long-term strategies, and you need to be able to plan for the future. It's very hard to do that if you don't have that predictable and flexible funding going forward. So these are 4 challenges that we're taking a sustained look at this year and figuring out, well, what can we do internally and what can we do with our First Nations partners to overcome those challenges. So it's going to be a lot of work this year, but it's work that we're doing with our partners and with our First Nations partners very closely as well. That wraps it up for me.
Thank you, Nelson.
I'll pass the mic.
Over to Sean.
Thanks, Siva. So FNHC is a little different than colleagues over to my left in that we don't have a dedicated housing program that we fund. We don't build residential homes, obviously. So our number one priority, obviously, is going to be service delivery to the First Nations, because that is our bread and butter, particularly in the little group that I work in. There's about 30 of us in the province. There's obviously myself, some managers, some field EHOs, some data entry people. We're a fairly small group. But obviously service delivery directly to the community is obviously going to maintain to be our number one priority for the time being anyway. But some of the innovative things that are happening in my little world, it's not really reflected up there on the screen, particularly for the third one, because I didn't realize when Siva called me last week I was being put on the record, but that's okay. That's okay. So kind of the first innovative thing that has really been going on for the last, I would say, 2 years, is a real renewed interest at the First Nation level to take on some of the work that we provide. We provide health-based services directly to the community. So over the last 2 years, there's been 2 fairly large transfer of services directly over to First Nations control for a number of communities in Ontario. There was one for Kenora Chiefs Advisory and another one for Ottawa First Nations Management. So for the communities covered by those tribal councils, they now provide the services that we used to provide. So again, this supports the government's overall initiative for providing more care and control to First Nations. And these particular communities, they get housing inspection services that they want, essentially. They can direct how this is done in a method, in a way that's most suitable to them. So again, it's a bit of a sea change for us. The last time we've had any devolution of services on the environmental public health side of things would have been in the mid or early 90s. So right now, with these 2 devolution projects, there's 19 communities right now in Ontario that receive their environmental public health services directly from groups that are First Nations controlled, either at the tribal council level or the community level. And the last one, again, which isn't really reflected there, and I don't really want to spoil it too much, is that over the last year, at the national level, FNHC has been the principal funder of a fairly new study that's just been essentially announced in February. And actually, there's going to be a talk on it here in Thursday, I believe, if I remember the agenda correctly, by Dr. Tom Kavesi. And I want to get the wording right because it's not doesn't really roll off the tongue. But it's the Food, Environment, Health and Nutrition of Children and Youth study. They're calling it FNHC for short. So, again, Dr. Tom Kavesi is one of the primary investigators on this. The AFN is obviously involved as primary investigators. University of Montreal, Ottawa are involved as well. And the reason it ties into the folks in the room here in the overall housing conference is that one of the aspects of the study is looking at housing conditions with regard to the overall health of the children living in those homes. Because we can make guesses about how children's health are affected by the housing that they're living in, but this study seeks to quantify that a little bit. And it's not going to be a small study. It's not going to be quick. It's going to be 10 years, go coast to coast. There'll be lots of Ontario communities, I'm sure, will be involved, as well as communities all over the country involved. Northern communities, southern communities, kind of a broad collection of participants. And so specific to housing, they're going to look at housing conditions. They're going to look at the indoor air quality in those homes, so what people are breathing in. And they're also going to look at, like I mentioned, respiratory health. So they're going to actually measure the lung function of children and youth living in those homes. And at the end of the study, the goal is to say, okay, if housing generally is in this shape and the kids' respiratory function is relatively poor, you could hopefully make those links with the overall goal to say, okay, we're going to quantify this for the first time because nobody has these answers. So again, I don't want to get too deep into the weeds about this study. Dr. Kavesi will be here Thursday morning, I believe, to really give a good look at what this study is going to look like. So it is something that FNHC is funding nationally, and it is something that we're quite excited to assist with. It's something that we see as needed and useful, and we hope that many of the folks in the room here participate, either at the band manager level or housing manager level. So I'm sure a call will go out looking for participants, and we hope that everyone who is approached will participate, because we see it as a very, very important study from a health, public health, and a housing standpoint. Thanks.
Thank you, Sean. Now we're going to turn it over to, can you hear me? Okay. So now we're going to turn it over to the audience. I know you've heard quite a bit of information from all the presenters and the panelists. We only have until 2:45 for this session. So we're going to turn it over to the audience for any questions, comments, feedback you have for the panelists. So I also want to remind that if you haven't done the survey mentioned earlier, please do that, and we'll pick that up shortly. Okay. Yeah. Okay, there's a question there.
Son? Hi, Wes Bova, President of Ontario First Nation Technical Service Corporation, Advisory Engineer for Matawa Tribal Council. Just wondering on the CMHC initiative, if there have been any discussions with ISK on the shortcomings with respect to community infrastructure to be able to build these proposed units that you have, because I haven't heard that. And if that's not there, this program will fail miserably, just in terms of being able to have serviceable lots. We did a pilot program last couple of years at Matawa that was pretty well done. I think one of the critical aspects on that was just realizing those cost savings. But another important part was the transitional housing that's required. If you're going to renovate a house, you have to have transitional housing to move those people into while you're renovating a home. And that wasn't there. I think that was pretty profound, and I'm pretty sure that's the same for pretty much every community here. They're so overcrowded. So those types of things, they need to be in place. I also just had a question regarding the OZ form fiasco when the inspection services were taken away from the tribal councils and others. We're currently fighting with form to get paid for $30,000 for inspections that we provided over a year ago. Are you able to comment on that?
So going to the first part about the units, the units that were presented on the slide are units for both on and off reserve. I think you're referring to the units that we had mentioned under co-investment or one of those programs. So that is not just on reserve housing, it's on and off reserve across Canada. So that speaks to that. In terms of are we working with ISK with respect to infrastructure, we do have a working relationship with both head offices, definitely. We need to probably get a little bit better at a regional level to work better together in terms of having synergy and leverage our plans better. So that's something that we can definitely work toward. And in terms of OG, yes, I do understand that they went bankrupt. In terms of all I know from our end is that they were fully paid. There's no outstanding money owed to them from us. It's obviously a really unfortunate situation, and I'm not exactly sure, because I'm not involved in it, what the next steps are.
Thank you, Terry.
Yeah, just one more question for Nelson. I did actually meet with Minister Miller last week and heard his speech at COO. He also announced a 10-year time frame to improve, I guess, conditions in First Nation communities. I'm wondering if there was any money associated with that or any type of plan, because I didn't hear any of those details provided. It was very broad, sweeping statements about how this great change is going to happen over the next 10 years, and it was almost a complete reversal on what Minister Bennett and Philpott had previously indicated about getting rid of ISK and letting First Nations take care of themselves, instead of saying, well, we're going to be overseeing your stuff here for another decade, and then no end in sight.
Okay.
Thanks for those questions. Nelson, if you could address that 1 minute or less. We want to get to another question as well.
Okay, Wes, if I don't answer this way, we can always chat afterwards. But I don't think the two goals are contradictory. So one piece that came in the minister's mandate letters was 10-year distinctions-based infrastructure strategies or infrastructure plans. And it's basically to work with First Nations so that we have an idea of, well, what are the requirements for the next 10 years? Part of that, that has to include that transfer of care and control. So that has to be part of the plan too. So how do we actually get there so that the government is backing away and First Nations have that space to take over care and control and decision making? So I think when we're talking about the plans, that has to be part of the plan that's built in there. So that's a piece of it right there. So I don't actually think it's contradictory to what the previous direction was, that we're still going ahead. It's actually legislation to the transfer. So it's not something that we're going to be backing away from anytime soon. In terms of funding, it's still early days. We have just recently come out of an election. Mandate letters have come out. There's been no budget announcements yet, so we're basically all waiting for what that means in terms of the funding to go from here. So that's basically where we are at this point.
Thank you, Nelson. We can take another question from the back.
Yes, good afternoon. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah?
Okay. I'm coming down with a bit of a cold, so that's why I asked. I'm from the Northwest Territories, Clutzelgay Northwest Territories, which is east of Yellowknife. And I was really interested to hear the presentation and also the words from the panel. It seems to me, and I may be wrong, that this conference is specifically for Ontario. It seems to be coming across this way, that this program is sort of geared to Ontario. Am I correct? Or because if I am, then I'm in the wrong place. You can answer that first.
I think that's a question I'll direct to the organizing committee. John, are you able to answer that question?
Yeah, the conference is geared towards Ontario. We've opened it up to an audience outside of Ontario, just as a attendance and understanding what we're going through in the province. We haven't opened it up to a national conference in terms of dealing with issues outside of Ontario yet, mainly because we represent the tribal councils in Ontario. and we don't want to speak for anybody else outside of Ontario.
So the First Nations Housing Conference funding is only for Ontario.
Are you referring to the program-specific funding that ISC and CMHC offer?
That's right. Those things that were mentioned over there, like the $13.17 million.
All the programs that CMHC offers under the National Housing Strategy, even other suite of programs that are specific to unreserved First Nations, are applicable across Canada. So you, in the Yukon, or the Northwest Territories, are more than eligible to apply for those programs and qualify for them. And you are, encouraged to look at the website and go through the programs, because all the details and requirements are listed on the website in terms of eligibility and criteria for applying.
Yes, sorry, I didn't pick up on that right away, but as Trim mentioned, Brad gave 2 presentations on 2 specific programs that we offer. The dollar amounts for those programs are Canada-wide.
Excellent. The other question I had was, in the Northwest Territories, there is only one reserve, and we're not reserved. I did have questions about off-reserve funding also, but that can be questioned. In the Northwest Territories, the housing needs is also dealt with the Government of the Northwest Territories Housing Corporation. So I was just thinking, listening, that the funding stream seems to be coming from the federal government, but there's also mentioning of partners, which I don't really understand, because the partnerships seems to be referring to First Nations. Well, I don't know of any First Nations that has adequate funding to fund its own housing needs to be sitting here. I mean, I'm totally confused. But I am, and my First Nations is very interested, and has the same kind of situation as other First Nations across Canada. We do have housing needs. We do have dilapidated, what we call peopleless homes, and we need to have funding to repair them so that people can have their own homes. And so the information seems to be a little bit confusing for me. But the one question I wanted to ask was, will FNHC also be having such conferences in the West or in the North?
Again, I think that's a question for John. 1 minute or less.
Yeah, I could have a conversation with you on the side about that, but the goal is to expand. We have to have the voices come from those areas too, right? We can't represent people from across Canada if we're not there. So yeah, so that discussion would have to be had with people representing those areas, and if they wanted to come together. At the moment, we stick to Ontario because that's who we represent.
Thank you, John. We're going to go to our next question. One more question, and then we have a small presentation from the surveys that David is here somewhere. Okay, so one more question, and then we're going to go to the survey results.
My name is Leslie, and I'm from Nunavut. So my question is, and I thank you for your questions back there, because we're not from Ontario. But my question is, I believe your name is Sean for Health. Is there still going to be some dedication to the health issues, such as mold remediation, going forward? Because obviously we have housing shortages, but some of our houses, a lot of our houses have mold issues. I'm just wondering if there's going to be ongoing support for mold remediation and renovations going forward.
I think the answer to that is, particularly in light of Nunavut, I think is a little complicated, at least for me to answer anyway. My group does inspection services from a public health perspective. They will go in, they will have a look at a home, provide a report back to the home occupant or the band manager, Basically, whoever owns the home would basically say, this is what I saw, and this is what I recommend be repaired, whether it's mold or roof leaks or flooring or whatever. My program doesn't fund mold remediation, so that would have to be done through other more housing-related funding sources. And then kind of furthermore to that, we don't provide services to New Nunavut. Everything we do is south of 60. So that would be obviously the analogous inspection service would be an EHO working for probably the government of Nunavut. Health and Social Services would be the department, I would think, and I know that because I lived in Iqaluit for 2 years, and I was the EHO for the Eastern Arctic. So they would provide the inspection services for you guys. But as for the housing program having to do with remediation and actually doing the work, I don't really know what the answer would be for your situation.
Thank you, Sean. I was told we can take one more question. Is there anyone? Okay, so David from CMHC, are you here somewhere?
Hi.
Okay, there's a question.
Student from Carleton University here, so I'm pretty uninformed on all of this. I'm hoping maybe CMHC can clarify. I think I heard something about the majority of the homes being eligible for this funding being 25% better than NBCC standards. And I'm just wondering how best, as a community, FNHC could approach delivering homes that are 25% better than currently being deployed on market with limited access to funding. Any thoughts on that?
So energy efficiency, under our co-investment program stream, yes, in terms of energy efficiency, we're looking at new builds and under the repair stream, improvements to energy efficiency in that area. Is that what you're referring to? I just want to make sure I'm responding to the question properly. Yeah, so is there funding for that? So that's what the program, the co-investment offers a partial grant program. It's a loan first program, and there's criteria definitely involved in the program. But perhaps we can talk to you a little bit more off the side to share with you all the details about the program. But you're right, that is a requirement of the program.
Thank you, Terry. So I was told the survey results are quite lengthy and they won't be able to present it in the next few minutes we have. So what we're going to do is we're going to communicate that to all of the 3 managers that are here and internally for our planning teams. We will make that information also available through the conference organizers for any communities to access. So we'll continue on with the questions and feedbacks and comments from the audience. Any other questions? Yeah, there's a question here. A comment or feedback?
Just a question. With regards to this PowerPoint presentation you made,
yeah,
will that be available in a readable manner? The fine print was kind of a killer. So will we be able to download that and be able to read it, or are we going to have to fight with that? I would suggest you maybe break out your PowerPoint into individual columns.
Yeah, the resolution is not that great on the screen, but it is pretty good on the printed paper. We will make it available on the website on PDF format.
Yeah, like I'm saying, even on that format you have there right now on that PDF, if you could break that out into a PowerPoint by sections, that would be terrific.
Thank you for that feedback. We'll work with John to get that out to you somehow. Any other questions? So what I wanted to do is ask a question to maybe Nelson. Can you highlight some of the initiatives that the department is working on to support the transfer of care, control, and management to First Nation partners? What is the department doing at the national level to support that government agenda?
So that's a good question. Thanks, Eva. So we're, in terms of the initiatives within the government, our role is to support. So our role is basically to fund First Nations partners to lead this work. So that's the short answer. There's a few organizations that have come forward with proposals. So it's a bit of a multi-step process. So right now we do have funding available for what we're calling proof of concept, so that an organization that wants to look at an idea, they can have funding to actually go out and engage with First Nation communities and figure out, well, what is it that First Nations want to see in terms of their service delivery. So that's it in a nutshell. We're working with a few organizations in particular, so I'll give a couple of quick examples. In the Atlantic, there's the Atlantic Policy Congress. They're developing something called the Atlantic First Nations Water Authority. And the idea about this is it would be an authority to deliver water and wastewater services to their member First Nations. It's predominantly in Nova Scotia right now. And the idea is that you'd have basically a hub and spoke model where you'd have one centralized authority that's delivering the water services for their member First Nations. So there's a few advantages to this too. There's economies of scale to be realized. It also gives more decision-making authority to that organization. So right now they're basically developing their business model to figure out, okay, what would this actually look like in practice? So that basically once they're ready and once First Nations say this is the direction we want to go in, they're able to turn the key and basically this will be able to start up and function the way people want it to function.
Thank you, Nelson. Yeah, go ahead. There's a question, a comment?
Just in my meeting with Nishkanaga and Minister Miller last week in Ottawa, it indicated that in looking at 3 communities so far who have received new water treatment plants, the current funding model is only funding 41% of actuals. So there's going to be some serious issues when the current hub program expires in March 2021, because you'll have no certified operators in place and you can't run a municipal water treatment plant on the monies that are currently provided by the department under the current O&M funding regime. So it's about 41%. It used to be 43%, but you're losing about 2% annually.
Thank you for that comment. Now I'm going to turn it over to the audience. What recommendations or suggestions do you have for the panelists on better coordination of services between government departments? What would you like to see us working together on streamlining processes, programs, services? What did you find as difficult to work with between the departments that you work with? Do you have any suggestions, recommendations? Oh, sorry, there's one at the end.
Let's see. A suggestion and recommendations. As a former chief of the First Nations that I come from, I strongly believe in investing in your own people. And the Government of Canada, with its own good intentions in all the programs that it runs, it always seems to forget that the perception and the perspective of First Nations in regards to all matters are slightly a little bit different than the non-Dene. And so their own people should be in those positions and in those departments. That's a very strong recommendation. And then if you deal with reconciliation as the Trudeau government is wanting, that would be a big step. In that way, you would be training your own people to be in the managerial positions in the government departments, training your own people to be the tradespeople in your community so that you don't have high costs of bringing in trades. In the Northwest Territories, that's a huge problem there. We don't have our own tradespeople. And funding for training for our own people has to be found, not just under the ISET way, but also topping that off, because people in the isolated communities, the cost of living is so high. And a lot of factors are not there. I strongly recommend the investing in your old people and also having conference like this throughout the other areas. This is a provincial area, and you do have reserves here. But there are territorial areas also, and the province of Alberta, BC, doesn't have reserves either. So the complexity of how different groups are addressing their needs also has to be looked at. The other one that I found really interesting, that is, in our area we have claimant groups and First Nations claims that have direct funding on all programs right directly to the First Nations. And so the whole housing department, they deal with that. And I don't see the really need for a third party, especially when it's not your own people. And it's no offense to the way it is. We also are transitioning over time, and we have to rely on the way it is.
Thank you very much. Okay, so with that, I'm going to move to the closing remarks. I'm going to ask each of the panelists to give their recommendations as to what the communities could be doing to prepare for the future, given the government agenda of transferring care, control, and management to the First Nations by First Nations. From your perspective, if you could take a minute, each of you, say what recommendations would you give to the communities? Terry?
So in terms of, maybe it's not quite related to care and control, but it's related to a little bit more immediate than that. I talked a little bit about the way we've restructured ourselves, and I guess my recommendation, or we would need your help and support on, is when we move to the online application process, to really reach out to your assigned specialist to help you through that process so that we can all work towards meeting the deadlines that we have to meet, because we used to have quite a bit of control in our old world, and we won't have as much control and flexibility over adjusting deadlines and due dates, because they're going to be managed by different groups of people along the processing model. So I guess my suggestion is really work closely with your specialists to and we will come out with communications, and we will train you, and we will do everything we can to make the process as smooth as possible. But I guess I'm just asking for your support with us, your partnership with us, to make that whole transition as smooth as possible. It's not so much around the care and control, but it's really a need that's more immediate. And we suspect that the portal will be open for online applications probably around May, June. I'm getting the nod back there. Okay, so anyway, we're happy to help along the way, and it's going to look and feel very different, but we're there to help with that transition.
Thank you, Terry. Over to Nelson.
This is a really, it's a tough question, actually. I don't know if it's my place to be providing recommendations to you. We had recently, a couple of weeks ago, we had a face-to-face where we had all of the ISK regional operations, housing managers, and housing officers that work within the ISK regional offices came to Gatineau. We basically shared what's been working well over the past few years and where are some of the challenges and whatnot. And we had all of the regional offices say, well, what's really innovative that's happening in your region, and what's really working well? And every regional office, they gave examples about what's working well and what's actually where some of the lessons are. And whenever we asked them, where did you get the idea to do that? The ideas were always coming from First Nations themselves. It was really the First Nations coming to the ISK regional office and saying, this is what we want to do. How can we make this happen? How can we access the funding? So I think it's to continue to work with your regional offices in that respect. Don't be bound by the policies and procedures by government as well. If you have an idea, bring it forward. We need innovative ideas, and try to work with us, and we'll try our best to actually make it happen. So I think that's one thing. The other thing too is events like this, information sharing. That's so important, and to bear with us, give us the chance to listen, but to really to have these events where you can share information and share the lessons and challenges and what's working well and what's not working well. So,
thank you, Nelson. Over to Sean. I know we are over time. We'll be wrapping up in a minute.
I'll be quick. I'll be quick. If you're looking for my advice, oh boy, you're in trouble. Generally, the advice that I would give you is that climate change is not going away. It seems to affect every aspect of every Canadian community. But if you're in the business of housing, planning your infrastructure, building your infrastructure, tying it in with your other services, you should definitely try to weave climate change into your planning process. And if I can give a relatively quick plug for an ISC FNHC-funded program, it would be the Climate Change Health Adaptation Program. And the intent of this funding program is to assist communities in planning the health impacts of climate change. And again, it can be your infrastructure. It can be different diseases moving north with the increasing temperatures. We see that. And so again, have a look, Google the funding program, don't leave this money on the table. It's there for your use. And again, it's there to meet your needs, to actually formulate and plan over the course of a year or two what your community can do to plan for climate change with regard to how it will affect the health of your people. That would be my advice.
Thank you, Sean. So I'm sure you have many questions. I just want to let you know there is a number of federal employees in the room. Can I have all the federal government employees to maybe stand up or raise your hands? If you have any questions, feel free to approach them. I think most of them are here during the session, during the 3 days. And I'll be here as well. Feel free to approach me. Thank you very much, everyone, for attending today. And many thanks to the panelists for answering all the questions. And hopefully we'll see you next year and in higher numbers with other federal government departments joining the panel. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thanks, Eva.